always somebody gonna say, grow up and stop playing. And I want you to stop using your imagination. But imagination doesn't have a title on it, but if you lose it, you lost something big. So I want you to use your imagination with me. And I want you to help me. Now, anytime you hear me say squirrel, take your fingers and do it. Anytime you hear me say rabbit, take your two fingers like this. Right across your face. Every time you hear me say deer, put your thumbs up to your forehead. Open up your finger. Every time you hear me say bird, you know what to do. Every time you hear me say raccoon, put your hand on your chin and say, Now I want you to use your imagination. I want you to see a blue sky, clouds, and I want you to see trees and mountains. I want you to look at a valley, and down in the center of that valley is a beautiful, clear pond. Can you see it? I do. One day, right up on the side of the valley, was a big rock. And right there at that rock was a squirrel and a peaceful raccoon. And a bird flew by. And the bird said, I'm so thirsty. I just need just a little bit of water so I can help finish building my nest. And a rabbit hopped by. And the rabbit said, if I just had some water, I could finish watering my garden so that my family could eat. And a deer walked by. And the deer said, I'm weak from thirst. If I just had a little bit of water, I'd be able to lead my family where we could find berries to eat. And all of the animals always came to him. And the squirrel said, well, what are we going to do? What are we going to do? See, they always came to the peaceful raccoon. And they always figured out something that he could figure out for them. But this was hard. So the peaceful raccoon said, I understand. Just give me one night. And tomorrow, I'll figure out what to do. So that night, he walked back and back and forth in his den, trying to figure out what to do. And then he laid down. And right before dawn, when ideas came, he got the idea. So when the sun came up, he called to the birds and he said, go, gather up all our friends, tell them to meet me at the rock. So the birds flew up. And they began to gather, all of them, standing right there. So he says, I have an idea, but you must promise. So he whispered to the deer, do you promise? The deer said, we promise. And he whispered to the rabbit, do you promise? The rabbit said, we promise. And he whispered to the birds, do you promise? The birds said, we promise. And he whispered to the foxes and to the squirrels, and he said, do you promise? The squirrel said, no, we can't promise that because the water belongs to them. The raccoon said, no, the water belongs to everyone. Do you promise? Well, we promised. So the next day, before the sun came up, you should have been there. Because all of those animals came to the rock. And they stood right there. And then all of them marched down to the pond. And they encircled that pond. And they put their bodies next to each other. they did not move. When the sun came up, the lions, who had been resting all day, began to stretch. Time for my morning drink. Hey, you! Get away from my water! But the animals had promised, and they would not move. Well, then, let's roar! Wow! Roared at those animals. But those animals had promised, and they would not move. Well, then, let's scar! And they scratched the animals, and they hit them, and they scarred them. Animals would not move. They kept their bodies next to each other. Time went on. Finally, the lion said, well, what is it that you want? Peaceful Raccoon stepped out of the ranks and said, you must promise to share. The lion said, we share with you? Never. You don't look like us. You don't have veins like ours, teeth or claws like ours. No, never. So they continued to push them and scar them and humiliate them. And some of them fell. And they told the young to don't come close, but stand and watch to be witness. And as soon as one would fall, another animal would come out into the forest and take their place. This went on for hours. No one drank. No one. The lion said, okay, we give up. We promise to share. So the peaceful raccoon went over to that big lion, the biggest one, and he pushed his paw down into the deep black earth, and he put that paw around his eye. And he looked at his friends, and he said, oh, because the raccoon never had circles around their eyes. And then he took the other paw, smashed it into the rich black earth, and put it on his other eye, and he looked at his friends, and the friends said, wow, because around each eye was a black circle. And he stepped back and said to the lions, I will bear this, and all generations of raccoons that follow me, as your promise, as your pact to share. And with them, they opened their ranks, they invited the lions in, and then they all stepped and drank from the water. Now, if that peaceful raccoon were a human, who do you think it might be? A human being, a man. Who do you think that character could be? Martin Luther King. You're right. Martin Luther King. He did not care whether you were a squirrel, a deer, whether you were white, black, rich, poor, educated, uneducated. He did not care. It was to make sure everybody. Everybody. Civil rights was not about hatred. It was about not sharing. And we're still doing it. But he's still here. We don't